Hello everyone and welcome back to round 2 of the Maia Chess Open. I finished my game yesterday, so I'm recording this the day after because yesterday was a very long game and I needed the rest. I wasn't super tired, but I wanted to take some rest and take it easy and record this recap the day after. So in round 2, I face Juan Roberto Patino Romaris. I hope I pronounced it correctly, but my opponent was from Spain and he was rated almost 2000. And he used to be much stronger back in the day, so I knew that my opponent is a pretty decent player and I should definitely not underestimate him. And all morning, I prepared against d4 on the first move. Guess what happened? e4. I had to throw out all my prep out of the window as I did not expect the move e4 at all. And now I am here asking myself, what should I play? I have been thinking of playing very different openings, and this time I just decided, why not go for the Caro-Kann? It is one of the openings that I tried, didn't like, moved back to the French for that reason. But recently I've been feeling that I want to experiment a bit more. I want to learn the theory actually a bit better than I did back when I tried the Caro-Kann. But now I was not really prepared for this game when it comes to the Caro-Kann. So yeah, I just wanted to give it a try because I thought my opponent is also prepared to play against the French, probably. So I thought, if you're going to surprise me, I will surprise you. So that's why I went for the Caro-Kann. My opponent went for knight c3. So here I played d5, knight f3, bishop g4, and here we have this two knights variation where after h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. I'm giving up the pair of bishops with the idea that we are getting into French type of structures without that light squared bishop that is usually bad. Now, a little spoiler alert. For the entirety of the game, I was missing my light squared bishop. As a French player, that piece is such a magical piece that comes back to life towards the end of the game. Well, now the piece is gone and I was feeling pretty lonely, all right? that piece means a lot to me. So anyway, jokes aside, this is theory. This is one of the ways to play against this opening. I played e6, simply defending the pawn on d5. g3, I was a bit surprised about this because I guess I have tried this with the white pieces as well. Usually you go for d4 or d3. So I was a bit surprised by g3, but it's also very possible because the bishop is heading to g2 and that is very logical. So here I went for the move knight f6. Now, this is the start of a series of moves where I'm just developing pieces, but I actually have no idea what I'm doing. So I have a hard time seeing where the pieces are going. So my opponent went for bishop g2, and here I already spent almost 7 minutes, I think, or I have like some notes here of how many seconds I've spent, but I don't know if it's 6 minutes or if it's 693 seconds. Anyway, I'll leave that up to you guys to figure out, because you can if you look at the game on chess.com, let's say, you can find the clock times. Maybe I should include the clock times in the recap. I will think about that for the next one. But for now, we're going to do it without the clocks. And I will try to tell you when I was in time trouble and stuff, because I do remember that. Anyway, I went for knight bd7 here. Now, I'm aware of some ideas where I can play bishop c5 and bishop d4, but I couldn't quite figure out when it is possible, how it is possible. It looks so strange, but I have seen games that go like this. So I was trying to figure out how to play this, but I'm not so sure. I don't remember actually having played this line at all. So like, even when I played the Caro-Kann, I don't think I've played this. Anyway, I went not for bishop c5, but I went for knight bd7, short castle, and here I went for bishop b4. And in hindsight, that was maybe not the most ideal move. The bishop is a bit stranded there. A better move was knight e5, but the computer is saying that after queen f4, knight g6, you can repeat moves here. Now, of course, I don't want to draw against a lower rated player than me, so I would not have gone for that, but still, it was possible. So anyway, I went for the move bishop to b4, d3, and now the question is, do I take on c3 or not? And I really want to, because I want to damage my opponent's pawn structure, because after bishop takes pawn, takes d, takes e4, d takes e4, look at how bad my opponent's pawn structure is. But my opponent has a pair of bishops and I have only 2 knights. And in such an open position, I was not so sure if I was happy to face this bishop on c1. So that's why I thought, this is not great. I'm not so sure about this. So I wanted to keep things safe and just play short castle. Bishop d2 was played. I thought this move was not possible or like not good whatsoever, because after d4, which is the move I played, knight b1, the knight retreats, and there's no way that these pieces are good. There's no way that white can just retreat pieces and be fine. So I refuse to accept that after bishop takes d2, the knight will just develop and everything will be fine for white. I thought there's no way that I am allowing my opponent to develop that easily. So I go back with the bishop to e7 and thinking that, okay, my opponent is wasting time, so I can use this to my advantage. But turns out that I am supposed to take on d2. Also, it makes sense logically speaking, because when your opponent has a pair of bishops, you want to trade one of the bishops at least so that the power of the pair of bishops is gone, right? So logically speaking, it makes sense to take, but during the game, I thought that I'm just helping my opponent then, but apparently it is good to take here and simply close the position with e5 afterwards. But anyway, bishop e7 is what I played, a4, and here I went for queen b6. And here I already start to think, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no plan. I'm just waiting for my opponent to push, and I'm seeing the issues in my position. My pieces are stuck. I have a hard time breaking through in a position. Any sort of pawn break like c5, c4 will be met with, let's say, knight a3. My opponent can easily stop these pawn breaks, and I wasn't entirely sure what I was supposed to do, honestly. So yeah, and at the same time, I know that my opponent is going to attack on the king side with f4, g4, g5, and that's the type of play that I want to do. I want to be able to attack like this, but instead it's my opponent's playground here, so I was not really happy about that. But anyway, my opponent went for bishop c1 here to defend the pawn on b2, and here I thought there's absolutely no way. My opponent is wasting so much time putting the pieces back in the starting position, and I'm not better here. I could not possibly comprehend this, but I am worse. I am worse here. It's the worst. So here I went to rook 88, and the computer says this is not the worst move, but me personally, I give this a double question mark, with the reasoning that this move is the one and, well, maybe not the single reason, but it is the biggest reason what went wrong in the game. The next couple of moves you will see why, but this very move, not only is it completely useless, well, I had my reasons to play it, of course, but a few moves later, I realized how useless this is and how it was the start of a series of moves where my opponent is just totally crushing me, and I'm just completely stuck and have no space for my pieces. The reason why I play this is because in case my opponent plays move c3, I would take on c3, and then the d file would open for my rook. And I thought my rook is perfectly placed there. It's not doing anything on the a file anyway, so why not? Well, of course my opponent doesn't have to play c3, so what are we talking about? So yeah, my opponent went for knight e2. I don't see anything wrong just yet. I also don't see any move to play here that makes sense, so I go for queen c5. My opponent goes queen d1 to defend the pawn. I play e5 because I am once again absolutely clueless as to what to do here, and I thought let's just move that pawn and close the position. At least that bishop is not great there. Well, then my opponent, after quite a long thought, my opponent went for knight c4. And this is when I realized that I'm actually going to lose this game, because all of a sudden my queen is trapped. My queen on c5 is trapped. Can you believe this? Because the threat is to play b4. So let's say I make a random move, let's say h6. My opponent plays b4 here. My queen has no squares to go to. I have to take, and bishop a3. And guess what I'm losing over here? This bishop. This bishop is going to be captured on the next turn. Actually, my queen is also trapped, but I guess I can escape queen c3, I don't know. Not that it helps anything. Also, actually, I just realized after bishop takes e7, I'm even losing the exchange, so I'll be down a full rook. As if it couldn't get any worse. But yeah, the point is that b4 is the biggest threat ever, which means I have to stop b4, because if my queen cannot move, then I'm in trouble, right? And the biggest issue here is, remember what I said about rook a8? Because I played rook a8, I can't move my bishop. If my bishop could go to d8, everything would be fine. I would simply retreat to e7 with the queen, everything would be fine. But no, this girl over here, this lady over here, had to play rook a8, make matters so complicated for herself, and block all her pieces altogether. And because of that, I am just losing this. So I have to play move a5. It's the only way to stop b4. But of course, it doesn't stop my opponent from winning material, because now the pawn on a5 is a major weakness. My opponent went for bishop d2. I went for b6 because I kind of have to. It's also possible to play rook a8, but I thought initially I was going to play this move until I realized that there's knight takes a5, and after rook takes a5, there is b4, and I'm losing even more material. So that's why b6 is what I played, hoping that my opponent will not make the right moves here, because b4 and c3 are still moves that are in the air and my pieces are still stuck. My opponent went for rook b1, and I thought, okay, at least I'm not losing the queen, so I can play b5 now. Knight takes a5, rook a8, and here I'm trying to go for counterplay. My opponent goes for b4, queen d6, a takes b5, c takes b5. So here I'm down a pawn, but at least I have some compensation. I have something to play for here, as the pawn on c2 is quite a weakness, as well as the pawn on b4, by the way. And I can apply pressure to those pawns, at least. My opponent went for f4, rook fc8, and rook f2. So of course my opponent is going to defend that pawn, and rook f2, I really like that move because it's very good to defend from this side, and at the same time the rook is attacking on the f file, and the queen can join on f3 or f1 at some point, right? So it's a very flexible move. Queen c7, I like that for my opponent, by the way, not for myself. But yeah, I played queen c7, attacking the pawn. My opponent for bishop e1, because if bishop c1, then all of a sudden I have bishop takes b4, and I'm winning the pawn back, and I take the knight on the next turn, right? So that is something that my opponent always had to keep in mind, that there's this bishop takes b4 tactic. So instead, my opponent for bishop e1, of course, to keep defending that pawn on b4, I went for g6. I was not entirely sure what to go for here, because it's very common to play g6 so that you play knight h5 and try to control these squares over here. Because at some point the pawns will push, and then you maybe get to play knight f4. But in this very position, I feel like I'm missing some pieces to support this, or that the structure is not really in my favor in this case. So I'm also down a pawn, so that makes matters even worse. But yeah, I initially wanted to play knight to h5 on the next move, but after f5, I wasn't really so sure anymore if I wanted to play knight h5, because it felt like my knight would get stranded there, and all the pieces of white are right there. So I thought it was just only asking for trouble. So instead, I came up with a different idea. Why not knight b6? It was also on my mind to go knight b8, knight e6 to target that pawn on b4, but I thought knight b6, it makes a bit more sense because I'm heading to c3, trading off that bishop on e1, and maybe I can win the pawn on b4 very soon this way. g4 was played, knight fd7, just to make sure to get out of there. Rook e2, this move I was very happy about because it felt super passive. I guess it makes sense because my opponent wanted to make sure the rook is safe, but I was really happy about this as that is just very passive, and the queen on d1 is also unable to join the attack very soon. So here I was feeling a bit more confident about my chances. Knight a4 is what I played, h4, knight c3, and there we go. Bishop takes c3. Now here I took with the queen, and it was possible to take with the pawn, d takes c3, which is apparently the better move. But the reason why I didn't play this is because I thought this simply allows white to play moves such as d4, opening up the position. is the last thing I want for my opponent because of that bishop on g2. I was very terrified of that bishop opening up, and perhaps I was seeing ghosts here and there, as I am still putting a lot of pressure on this pawn on h4 is under attack, this pawn on b4 is also under attack, right? So I guess like g5, bishop takes b4, rook takes b4, and let's say, I don't know, rook takes a5. Actually, wait, that's a free rook, right? Queen c5 check, I just realized that's a free rook on b4. So actually bishop takes b4 cannot be captured. I guess this is something I missed, and because now the knight is under attack, so d4 is not going to happen at all. I guess I was just generally scared of any sort of d4 pawn push, and I didn't really, I just didn't really like that. So that's why after bishop takes c3, I went for queen takes c3 just to make sure that my pawns stay in the center, and I want to keep that pawn on c2 weak. That's a big target, right? So that's why I didn't want to shut down the c file. But I guess d takes c3 was, if you calculate it concretely, it was just very good. So yeah, rook b3 was played, queen c7. This was all expected. And here g5, and here bishop takes b4. I am finally getting my pawn back, so that's already a good start. Rook takes b4, rook takes a5, bishop h3. My opponent is setting up some tricks on this diagonal. Rook c8, rook b1, knight b6, just shuffling around. I mean, we're both trying to... I mean, my opponent is trying to play it safe. I need to put pressure on the queen side. It's the only hope I have here. I go queen c3, which turns out to be a big mistake, actually. It's a big mistake. I didn't realize this actually during the game, but turns out it's a big mistake because it allows my opponent to play f takes g6, h6, g6, and then queen f6. The queen is infiltrating, my knight is under attack, pawn is under attack, and my days are numbered here. So that is why this was not good at all. But my opponent got scared of my rook a1 move, and makes sense, right? So my opponent for rook c1, and this was how I survived the game. As rook a1 was played, rook e1, he has to play this to not lose the queen, right? Because there's a lot of attack on the first rank. So takes, queen d2. My queen is infiltrating. I'm not winning here. I thought I was doing so much better here already because material is even. I'm the one attacking here. That pawn on c2 feels like it's going to be lost very soon. So yeah, I thought I was much better here, but turns out it's not actually that great. And here my opponent made, I think, a big mistake, the move f6. It makes sense, as in it is permanently weakening my king, and my king is just locked on the king side. The back rank is very vulnerable. So long term, this makes sense because I'm in a lot of trouble for a very long time. But concretely, if you look at it short term, f takes g6 was much better. Once again, to keep that f file open, to attack the pawn f7, and then it's really hard for me to make progress because I have to keep an eye on that pawn on f7. So that would have been much better. An idea that the computer suggested here, which was really interesting to me, rook e1, rook e2, and rook f2. I think that is pretty epic to attack the pawn on f7 this way. But yeah, you do have to be careful with queen c3 and rook a1, remember? So I guess that's something you need to keep in mind. Anyway, f6 was played. I was pretty happy about this because I thought, okay, at least the king side is shut now. I do have to be careful, but now I have rook a2, bishop g2, and rook takes c2 is what I play. This is the 14th move. Both of us get 30 minutes added to our clocks. And by the way, before this, like for the last 10 moves, we were in time trouble. At least I was down to seconds. So I was playing on the 30-second increment. So that is why I was, yeah, I was very nervous. I was very nervous and had to play moves very quickly. Here, in hindsight, I think maybe I would have loved to play h6 instead and just keep that pawn on c2 for the time being because I need to get rid of that pawn on g5. Maybe it's not necessary to play h6 here, but I thought it would make a bit more sense maybe because in the long run that pawn chain is going to be the end of me. So yeah, I think practically speaking h6 would have been better to play here just to get rid of that pawn on g5 and be more flexible. But now that I took on c2, rook takes c2, queen takes c2, queen a1, and suddenly this queen is coming back to life, and I was not entirely sure if I was happy about that, because now I played with knight a4 and my opponent is slowly coming back in the game. I should have played with knight e7 here with the idea that I just hide my knight on f8, my king is completely safe, and my pawn is just moving forward, and this is just resignation, right? So I went for knight a4 instead, thinking that I'm completely winning. But after queen a3, queen c5, I missed the move queen a2 because I was thinking of the move queen b3 only, and after knight c3, I would have been happy to slowly make progress. Apparently queen c1 is completely winning here, and then knight c3, so I think that was also on my mind, but not sure if I would have played it actually. But anyway, I missed queen a2 because now after queen a2, I cannot play knight c3, as that is not making progress. And yeah, all of a sudden it's not so clear anymore. I play knight c3 anyway, queen a8 check, queen f8, because I didn't see anything else to do, queen b7. And here I have a hard time finding a plan because my queen is very passive. In queen endgames, the queen has to be in the center, at the front, not passive. If your queen is passive, it means either you're worse or not able to win. So that's exactly what is going on here. My queen is very passive and I have to keep defending the back rank, right? h6 is what I played just to try to untangle, honestly, and try to create an escaping square in case I get to move my queen around. Let's say my queen's on g3 and then my opponent gives a check on c8 so that I can run to h7. And I'm not checkmated just yet, so I have like an extra move that could be useful. So my opponent for bishop f3, and here I started to think, oh no, this is not good. My knight is dominated by the bishop. I can't go towards the king because I really wanted to play knight e2 check, knight f4, knight e6, but I couldn't leave the pawn on b5 alone just yet. So that's why now I don't know where to go with my knight. So I take on g5, takes on g5, b4. And yeah, I didn't know what to do. I just played b4, hoping that I can push the pawn someday. Also, I want to move my pieces around. My queen cannot really move. My knight wants to move but can't because it's stuck defending the pawn on b4, so I have to play b4. My opponent goes for king f2, I play knight a4, and this is like the only chance I have to move the knight around and hope for the best, honestly. King e2, and here I went for the move knight to b2, which turns out to be a big mistake because my opponent can play queen c6. That is a very strong move, as that move is single-handedly trapping my knight. I was thinking of playing b3 during the game. If something like this were to happen, I would play b3 and survive. But turns out that this is just much better for white, and I cannot escape with my knight. So how do I push b2, right? So my opponent can just play bishop g4. It's something crazy here, but the bottom line is that queen d5 can be played, attacking my pawn. I'm just stuck. I'm just completely stuck. So that's why queen c6 is very good. Instead of knight b2, I should have played the move knight c5. But what I didn't like here is after knight c5, queen takes b4, knight e6. So I did consider this, but I dismissed this whole idea because of the fact that my pawn on e5 would be hanging. So let's say queen b5, and if I take on g5, then queen takes e5, and I thought, I'm not really making progress here, but perhaps I could have activated my queen now, and that could have led to some chances. But yeah, during the game, I wasn't really able to see this, so that's why I didn't want to play knight c5. But apparently that was the one move to keep the advantage for me. But after knight b2, my advantage is gone, and I'm worse. However, my opponent went for the move bishop g4 instead of queen c6, so I'm still in the game. The game is still going on. Queen c5 is what I played. My queen is getting out because this was the whole idea behind knight b2. I want to get on the c file and give a check, win the pawn, and somehow give dozens of checks. And here, fortunately, my opponent went for the move bishop e6. And that was the final straw. This was the reason why my opponent lost. So of course, if I take, I'm checkmated, right? So I can't take. And the threat is queen takes f7. So what's left? Giving checks and hope that I can take all of these pawns and return safely with my queen. So here, a series of checks. Queen c2 check, king f1. Queen takes d3, king g2. Queen e2, king g3. Queen e3, king h2. Queen f4, king h3. Queen f3, king h2. I will leave out some of the details because the recap is already very long, but the point is that I'm just giving checks to play queen h5 and capture the pawn on g5 with check if the king were to go to the g file, right? So let's say king g3, I would take the pawn g5 with check, and then I would take the pawn on f6 right after. But here my opponent went back to h3, and now there are no threats in the position anymore, so I can take on g5 safely. Queen e7, queen f4 check, king g1. Here we were back to seconds on the clock, so it was a little bit stressful, but at least I can give a lot of checks. Queen g3, bishop g2, queen e3, king h2, queen h6 check. And here I realized that I don't have to play queen f8 because I'm not in check yet. So I can just play knight to d3. And if my opponent gives a check on e8, let's say I can just play queen f8. And with this knight move, I'm defending both e5 and b4. So all my pawns are defended and I'm just up 3 pawns. And I'm going to win this game. King g1, my opponent pressed the clock here with 1 second on the clock. He like smashed the clock and I was like, I didn't even realize. So that was really funny. Knight f4, bishop g2. I couldn't take that piece, of course, because of obvious tactical reasons. I thought this was actually lost. Oh wait, this is stalemate. I didn't realize. I thought it was just lost, but it's a stalemate. Wait, that's crazy. Okay, I didn't even notice. Anyway, I was not ready to take that bishop anyway, so I just played knight f4. Just play it safe. Don't need to get greedy here. Bishop g2, d3, queen takes e5, knight e2 check. And here my opponent flagged. But I was ready to play queen f4, check on the next turn, trade queens, and win the endgame easily. So yeah, this was quite an adventure. I'm really sorry for making these recaps so long. This was just such an interesting game. There's so much that happened. It was a truly big roller coaster, but fortunately I won. It was quite something, but I hope you guys enjoyed this game. I'm sorry for all the time trouble, stress. I've been through it all, if you are watching it live, that is. But yeah, I hope you guys still enjoyed this recap. Thank you so much for watching. I'll try to make the recaps shorter next time. This is very long. This is long, very long. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I hope to see you in the next one. I'm playing a GM in the next round. Ah! Wish me luck.